Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. We're really excited about this program tonight that celebrates all of our historic churches that started in the 19th century. We're here to go back in time, to remember where we came from, to discover what things were like in the 19th century and the 1800s. And most of all, to appreciate the heritage that we've inherited. I'm Alice Irby, and I'm with Weldon Action, sponsoring this event. We're here because of Reverend Francis Clow. Reverend Clow started this program. He had a way of touching various layers of this community, wherever he went. He used his time very wisely. I discovered after knowing for a couple of years, he would insert himself strategically into activities around the area, not just Weldon, but around the area. He kept his flock at the Weldon Baptist Church, this gentleman right here, informed as he traveled around the area and learned about the history. And he would send these, what I call staccato emails with emoji characterizations that gave you the impression that you were reading something like from the National Geographic magazine. You were seeing the world through the eyes of a writer. He didn't start out as a minister. He worked in other fields for quite a number of years. But then he read the Bible 3 times and he converted to Christianity. And when he did that, he became a 24/7 disciple of Jesus. He was filled with the Holy Spirit. He was modest, he lived frugally. But when somebody was in need, or they needed a lift, or a word of encouragement, he was there, either by word if he was present, or by postcard if he was somewhere else. A friend of his, who was his minister in Deloatch, Reverend Fullerton, said at Francis' funeral here, and you may remember this, when we encountered Francis, we were experiencing the Spirit of Christ through Francis. As I think about Francis, I think more than anything else, he helped us appreciate our humanity, our single humanity. His tombstone carries a phrase that he chose, and it reads, "A sinner saved by grace." Grace and compassion describe Francis' life. And it's useful for us to remember that in our days ahead. He became an active and creative member of Weldon Action. And he was interested in the history of Weldon. So he felt that the people of Weldon had a lot to celebrate in their history. And if they knew that history, they would be filled with pride about who they were and where they had come from. So he suggested that we start a Weldon Heritage Speaker Series. This was back in 2022. And we had 5 before he passed away. I don't think we realized, but Francis did, that the faith of our forefathers and their determination to worship in churches that they struggled to build contributed greatly to the character of the town, as much as the railroads, as much as the river and the canal, as much as the farms, as much as the businesses. Consider this, and we'll read more later. Between 1845 and 1883, 6 churches were formed in this small town. In the 1840s, there were just 700 people in Weldon. By 1880, there were about 900 people. People moving in after the Civil War for jobs on the railroads. To me, that's quite a number. 6 churches of 900 people. You are going to hear the story of those churches tonight from these people. We have a panel representing the 6 churches. Each church has about 15 minutes to tell you the history or say anything they want to about both churches and their experience. And then Dr. Flourine began to sort of wrap things up for us and bring us up to the 20th century, because we still have a number of churches in this community. We're blessed for that. We have even more than 6 now, I think. So she's going to bring us up to the 20th century. And then we'll have to all ask the questions and posting those questions and being able to meet and greet each other. The first person to speak is from the First Baptist Church, Dr. Stanley Edwards.
The church started in a house. This was in the 1800s. And there was some members in the community who wanted a church. And this lady had invited some people, one preacher, and I think there were 2 preachers, along with another person who was within our caretaker, a level of people. This was the organization period. And they had several months before they got organized to do a church. And the first church was in Harvest, they called it. And what it was a group of branches out in a desolate place where they could have service and not be bothered by other people who would come out and didn't want them to be there. So what happened, they decided to go further, and they built their own church. Now, the way the history tells me is where the bush hop was the same place that they put the other church. This was really a space, and what it was, that was a timber that they call pilings, and that was a very strong timber, and they would put the things in the ground and put like a fence, and they would put all of those around, but it had no seal, and didn't have anything out there that way. But they served the Lord. That was just a vacant space that they would get there and do that. But anyway, they sold it and went on to go on beyond. They first went to where the army people would sell food to the army people, permission, how you call it, commissary. But anyway, they used that as a place to have a less church on Sundays. And then it would go back to its original purpose on the other days. So that is really, really hard. And finally, and this is still in the early 1800s, in the late 1800s, they decided to build their own. And they got a little place, a little very small spot, and made that their church. And after that, they ran across where we are now, where the church is now. This church had decided to move on to this, a better place. So they bought the spot that we are in now as First Baptist Church. This was in the early 1900s, I think it was around 1910, somewhere in that area, neighborhood. And that's where First Baptist in its place now was started. And it has it's gone really good. I came to Weldon in 1965. I didn't know which church I wanted to go to. I came here to work in the public schools. And when I got to First Baptist, that was just turned my head. I said, this is where I want my children to be raised, in this particular church. So at that particular time, and until now, I have been an active member in First Baptist Church at Weldon. And I must say that along the way, we have had good times, bad times, and we've always been solid together. If there's anything that is troubling the church, we come together and we resolve it and we go on with all that serving the Lord.
Grace Episcopal is located at 416 Washington Avenue in Weldon, and it's a Gothic Revival style church. The church has a basic rectangular plan with a gable front orientation, includes a small rectangular chancel at the back of the rear of the church. The church has a bell tower, which also serves as an entrance vestibule, and the steep pitch of the nave and bell tower roofs enhance the church's Gothic Revival style. There are 5 stained glass windows on each side of the church, and the principal chancel stained glass windows installed in 1935. Fundraising for the church began in 1863. The first church service by an ordained minister was in 1863 and was held either in the literary hall or the dining room of one of the hotels. The congregation struggled with fundraising efforts during the Civil War and Reconstruction, but were determined not to go into debt. The construction began in 1872 and continued slowly. The church was completed in 1889. Grace Episcopal was listed as a mission church prior to 1874 and was known as Weldon Episcopal Church. The church was formally admitted into union with the Convention of the Diocese of North Carolina on May 1, 1874, and was named Grace Episcopal Church. The present church building was consecrated on July 7, 1889. The Episcopal Church, unlike some other independent churches, is part of a diocese. Our diocese there are 3 dioceses in North Carolina, part of the Episcopal Church in the United States, which is connected with the Anglican Church in England. So we have a hierarchy. The Grace Episcopal Church was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1991. Grace Episcopal has always had a relatively small number of communicants. There were 11 members when the church was formally admitted into union with the Diocese of North Carolina. The church received its first rector shortly afterwards, and the congregation grew from 34 members in 1889 to 50 in 1890. In the 1960s, when I attended Grace Episcopal, the church was very vibrant and active. Church records show there were 86 adult communicants, 31 children in Sunday school, and 20 adult Sunday school students and teachers. By the mid-90s, Grace Episcopal was struggling financially, and there was a decline in membership. Active adult membership dropped to about 30 communicants, and there was 1 member under the age of 16. The financial situation of Grace Church was aided by a trust established by one of its former members after his death, and these funds allowed Grace Episcopal to meet its financial obligations as long as it stayed open. Sadly, a decline in membership continued, and Grace Episcopal Church closed on December 24, 2024. So I would like to close with some personal reflections. Weldon was a great place for me to grow up. I had lots of friends. We considered Weldon the center of the universe, and it was a wonderful place. And that experience carried over to our church experience as well. We had a good group of friends who attended Grace Episcopal, and we have wonderful memories of growing up in the church. So it's certainly sad that Grace Episcopal is closed. But this is a difficult time for small churches in rural eastern North Carolina. However, we hold dear to the members of these churches when they were vibrant and played an important role in the development of us as children and young adults. Thank you.
St. Matthew AME Church of Weldon, North Carolina, is one of hundreds of churches whose roots begin with Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, founded in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, by Bishop Richard Allen, who was born a slave. This church is known throughout the world as Mother Bethel and is the African American Episcopal denomination. It grew out of a burning desire as well as an essential need for the slaves as well as free African American individuals to worship freely. Richard Allen was a minister, an educator, a writer, born into slavery, taught himself to read and write, converted early, joined the Methodist Church at 17 years old, and eventually purchased his own freedom. In 1866, he founded the African Methodist Episcopal, the first independent Black denomination in the United States of America. In 1887, Allen negotiated a price and purchased a lot to build the church. After years of ownership, Bethel AME Church was built, completed, and occupied in July 29, 1794. The tract of land which Mother Bethel Church is firmly anchored is the oldest parcel of real estate in the United States continuously owned by Black people. St. Matthew grew out of a Sunday school class that was organized by Reverend J.E.C. Barnum in 1871. But they weren't officially organized and did not become official until 1874. They were located on 2nd Street, east of Washington Avenue. Then they relocated to West 1st Street in the 200 block along the railroad. They suffered some tribulations along the way, some tragedies along the way. However, in 1837, the church was partially destroyed when it was hit by lightning. In 1948, on Christmas Day, the church was totally destroyed by fire. It was rebuilt in 1949 under the leadership of Reverend J.T. Gibson. A lot of written history cannot be found, and I'm surmising that it is due to the fact that the church had 2 fires and many of the records were destroyed. So we have to put together and research and find out as much as we can about the history of St. Matthew. In 1964, St. Matthew AME of Weldon merged with St. Luke of Halifax, and they merged in Weldon. St. Matthew's continues to let its light shine through its various ministries, involvedness in volunteerism, constant outpouring of love, service, and donations, and involved in community partnerships. Thank you.
St. Peter had a very unusual beginning because St. Peter started in a coffin shop. Can you believe that? And I brought the original church history with me so that I could point out some things about St. Peter. St. Peter Baptist Church history, organized in the year 1883, and the cornerstone was laid in the year 1889. St. Peter Baptist Church and St. Peter Missionary Baptist Church, we are a missionary Baptist church, had its beginning in Dick's old coffin shop. And Dick's old coffin shop was located on 2nd Street. In later years, they moved uptown to the old Gideon Hall, which was located on Poplar Street. Mr. Emery and he was a white man, gave this portion of land where the church now stands on Mulberry Street. In the year 1883, the church was built under the leadership of Reverend Act, that's A-C-T, Act Tillery, and the cornerstone was laid in the year of 1889. And then our historian at that time was Miss Hattie Mignon Gatlin. And she was a busy little lady. She would come to church and she would have her little notepad and she would fold it over and everything that went on, Miss Gatlin wrote it down. And so she compiled church history and she made 3 copies. She left one at the church and she kept one. And then she gave me one. I don't know what happened to hers. I don't know what happened to the one that she left at church. But I got mine, and I apologize. After some time, the church elected Reverend J.A. Davis as its pastor. Starting his administration, the old church was torn down, and we went over to Halifax County Training School. And we were there for 2 years. And then in 1949, we came for a new church. That's on Mulberry Street. But during that time, you know something? A little bit of money went a long way if you knew what to do with it. Because our salary was 15 cents for the men and 10 cents for the ladies. That was our monthly salary for the church. Because the people contributed their labor and their time. Land on Mulberry Street, across from the church, was purchased from the late Mr. Ronnie Bailey and his wife, Wilma Bailey, by the church on June 21st, 1982. And here she lists everybody who gained anything, who did anything, flags, communion tables, the Bibles, the hymnal. She just listed everything. She didn't leave anything out. And so I'm grateful for her that she took such great care of keeping records and names of people who really contributed to St. Peter. The first Sunday school was organized by Miss Marie Demery and Maddie Jones on June the 14th, 1902. The Crusader Club was organized by Reverend Cofield in 1949. The first senior choir was organized by Miss Lucille Wood in 1918. First junior choir was organized in 1912. The first gospel chorus that we had was organized in 1928. St. Peter Missionary Circle was started in 1911. The first usher board was 1918. So you see, we go way back with getting St. Peter organized. And so I just wanted to give you this little bit of history about St. Peter. Thank you very much.
They came together to begin to go out into the community to invite people into this church. And their numbers began to grow relative to the growth of Weldon at that time. But as so many churches, it happens over time, and unfortunately for this church, the numbers began to dwindle and eventually began to cease until 1879. And during that period of time, this was not known as Weldon Baptist Church. It was known as the Roanoke Baptist Church. During this dormant time, Ms. Allen passed away on September the 21st, 1873. She went home to receive her heavenly reward. And it was at this point that her son, Walter E. Daniel, graduated from Wake Forest College, and he came back to Weldon to start working as a lawyer in Weldon. And he was 23 when he returned to Weldon. And he immediately began to see a need to rekindle this original spirit, if you will, of what had been started so many years earlier. And so he did that. And according to the church directory for the 100th anniversary celebration in 1965, we have a few records. And these records were found in the dismantling of the W. Daniel home. And so from March the 16th, 1879 until September the 25th, 1887, we have some records of some of their conference meetings. But the first recording is Roanoke Baptist Church, March 16th, 1879. Reverend R.T. Vaughan was the moderator, and he actually preached in the church in Weldon for just a short time. After that meeting, the next meeting was held on April 18th, 1879, where H. Borst and Walter Daniel were admitted by letter to the church. And the significance of this is Walter Daniel, because as he was admitted with acceptance to the church, he began 44 years of faithful service to the church. And this lasted until March of 1923. In that same meeting, they voted to withdraw from the Showan Association to join the Tar River Association. Tim, I thought that was interesting. And now they are members of the North Roanoke Baptist Association. There is no record, and I thought this was interesting in doing the history of Weldon Baptist Church, but there is actually no record of a church vote to change the name of the church from Roanoke Baptist Church. But from this time forward, it became known as Weldon Baptist Church. A motion was passed on February the 27th, 1881, to purchase a bell for the church. And when Reverend Blake decided to leave for the mission field, Reverend McDuffie accepted the call and was elected to begin the pastor there in October of 1883. The last minutes were found from the books that were found for September the 25th, 1887. And there were no more recordings of minutes of the conferences until January the 12th. And there was a lapse there of 24 years. But there was still activity that was happening from this small church during that 24-year period of time. And they were active in the January of 1912. Its membership had grown to 152 members. In 1913, a new year came into being for Weldon Baptist Church, sort of a rebirth. It was this year that brought about a desire for an expansion of a new house of worship. The population of Weldon began to grow slowly, and so did the church membership. And in order to meet the impending future needs, it became obvious that a new and more adequate facility was needed. And so they did what every church should do. They went to the Lord in prayer. And they came back with an estimated cost of $15,000 was submitted to the church for a new building. In today's currency, that would be $473,480. And it seemed like an insurmountable amount for this congregation, but after much prayer, much consideration, Mr. Walter E. Daniels stated that he would contribute 1/4 of the estimated cost, which was $3,750. Mr. J.L. Shepherd, by the way, Nat owns part of a farm that he had now, had authorized him. He wouldn't come forward and speak on his own, but he authorized Walter Daniel that he would contribute the same amount and Walter Daniel would contribute. When the people heard that, they got even more excited and they began to give and give and give until they were able to buy another lot to begin laying the cornerstone. And in the spring of 1915, construction began, laying the cornerstone. In the fall of 1915, the first worship service was held January the 2nd, 1916, and it is not a preaching service, it was a wedding. The building was dedicated after all the debts were paid May the 2nd, 1920. And while they were building the church, the Presbyterian Church in Weldon invited them to come into their facility to hold their worship services. And that's what you call coming together, right? So over the coming years, for the next 35 years, Weldon Baptist would have its periods of prosperity and depression. But through all of this, they continue to be a shining light in this community, continue to preach the gospel. Over the coming years, many faithful members would move away for various reasons, and several of these members went home to be with the Lord. In the 1940s, a new dream was born, another step of growth, starting with a little, and God blessing with faithfulness, with a little bit in Boone to a lot. And I'm going to turn it over to Nat now, and he's going to take it from the 40s to 2025.
I'm going to we pastors and just tell you the things that happened during these first years. And the church really grew because World War II was over in 45. Work grant was there from 1946 to 1950. The church was still growing, needed more room. And the lady next door passed away, and she left in the house. Work left in 1950 to go to the mission field in Japan. Prepare the Baptist word to Japan. But Christ came in, and he was there for about 4 years, and the church kept on growing. They saw a need to build an education building. After that, Ernest Glass came through, and he was there 3 years, and he left in 1956, and he went to Malaysia to the mission field. So, Brandon is one of that 3 missionaries in the church to spread the word. Elder Knight came on the scene in 1956. One Sunday after he got there, and 320 people were. And right after that, but he also an article back then was in the Pearl in 1977 that Baptists always had the right to disagree. So a disagreement came about, and the church split, and the Free Will Baptist Church in South Weldon came to be. The 5th preacher that came was Frank Getty. He did about 3 years, and another disagreement came about, and that's been split off in the Good News Baptist Church from Frank. So that's 2 churches in about 10 years. Then Jack Grayson came on the scene, and he stayed the longest for almost 16 years. In February of 1977, there was an article in the Herald. The Wellman Baptist Church had 177 residential families and 18 non-residential families. That's 195 families were members of that church in February 1977. That's a lot of people. And along there was 46 to 85. That's when the church stopped growing. Because those who were allowed in like 1946 or 60 years later, a lot of them died. Goes down. Also, the road moved around 301 around town. 95 came through. And at one time, we were on the they had 9 filling stations. It's all two that. So, as the business started, that going down, people didn't have anywhere to work. The kids went off in college, they came back, there's no job. Then the membership is defined going 100 people by 2006. About 50 or 60 was active. And that's 7 preachers over 60 years. After 2006, we had a lady person, only lady preacher out of their age. She stayed about 3 years, and it went down. When she left, it was on 40 or 50 people in the church then. In 2021, the young man showed up, praising God. He was a praising first time. He was a great leader. He was a leader of our church. He was a great organizer, bi-vocational preacher. Anybody that ever met him was a friend, and he was loved by everyone.
This church was started by 7 people in 1845. People named Captain James Simmons, Mr. James Simmons Jr., Mrs. H.T. Wyatt, Mrs. Mary Allen, and Mrs. W.T. Whitfield. It was a small wooden chapel. It was erected on an old close to the canal. And they didn't have a preacher, of course. But people on something called the Roanoke Circuit applied service. This church also moved its location 3 times. In 1863, of course, there was much interest in Weldon because of the war. Church was converted to a hospital during the Civil War as well, and the benches were taken out, and it was used as a hospital briefly, I think. 1874, he started to be interested in moving the church but then getting a better place for the church. They acquired a lot at the corner of Mulberry and 3rd Street. And the building was constructed and dedicated in 1876. It was a frame building consisting of a vestibule, a sanctuary, and an upstairs gallery on 3 sides. There was another church in 1910. The new building was constructed on Washington Avenue, 105th Street. It was done very rapidly. Cornerstone was laid on the 24th of November, 1910. And the old building was sold to a Baptist congregation, and they made significant improvements, and it's still in use today. The new building was dedicated in 1911. It was a handsome brick building consisting of a large sanctuary. Well, I guess next I'll just get to the bottom. Reverend C. Owens, he came to the church in 2000. They did some ministry. I'll let her tell you about it.
In the 2000, there were about 35 active members in worship. There was an adult Sunday school class taking place. The educational building was being used by the Cornerstone Christian School until they moved to their new location on the west side of the Runner Rapids. Throughout the years, Weldon United Methodist Church supported global ministries as well as local ministries. A monthly community meal was enjoyed. There was always plenty of food. It was for donation. You could get seconds. And one evening, there was somebody that had been invited to be a guest to share in their music that evening, and they didn't come, and they didn't come, and they didn't come, and somebody said, well, if that person didn't show up, you can marry us. And I said, well, you didn't have your license? I thought they were joking. And yeah, they're in the car. Well, Steve didn't show up, so we had to wait. Every 5th Sunday, while I was pastor at New Hope in Weldon, we, on 5th Sundays, would exchange worship spaces, and one Sunday we'd go to New Hope, and the next Sunday we would go to Weldon, and it was all supported by both churches. They fit together like a hand in a glove. In the meanwhile, in 2010, South Rosemary United Methodist Church became a part of that charge, and it eventually closed in June of 2023. But around 2015, we began a local mission. We called it the Brown Bag Ministry, and it happened to take place during this time of season of the year we know as Lent. And we would meet, I think it was a Thursday, around lunchtime or before, and we would pack 40 brown bag lunches, representing the 40 days of Lent. We also partnered with the Episcopal Church at some point in their fellowship hall in doing this brown bag ministry. As the years continued, many active members we lost due to death, as well as some were not able to attend as they once had because of health issues. 2010, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of where the church continues to stand today, opening up the cornerstone and sharing the history as well as adding history back into the cornerstone. Around 2014, we began to share in much prayer and holy conversation about the possibility of the church closing due to not being able to sustain the ministries as well as take care of the building. At that time, there were about 10 to 12 active people attending. I was very sensitive as their pastor as they walked this journey, as it had to be painful. Anytime one of your religious organizations closes where you have experienced so many major times in your life, it has to be pain. But I also know that with death comes resurrection. As a believer, I hold that deeply. So the closing service was held on October the 23rd, 2016. But we give thanks for all the many years that George has talked about, and all these other people have talked about, to people's faithfulness to whatever church it may be. The physical structure, yes, closed. but the spirit of Weldon United Methodist Church lives on. And I continued to have the pleasure of officiating at many of those funerals, going to visit them, and I continued to be that pastor when they had a need. So I thank you for the opportunity to share with you this evening.
Churches preserve our cultural heritage by maintaining tradition of family gatherings, music, and art forms that reflect the unique identity of our cultures. The town of Weldon can take pride in the fact that the church's presence, their very presence, has had a significant impact on Weldon's economic development since the days of its founding fathers. As early as the 1700s, Weldon's traditional churches, represented here tonight, have withstood the test of time, paving the way for other community churches to emerge. For example, from the 20th to the 21st century, Weldon's non-denominational churches, also considered our non-traditional churches, have experienced significant and continuous growth. As in 2010, non-denominational churches were considered the third largest Christian group in the United States, after the Roman Catholic Church and, of course, the Southern Baptists. Weldon's formation of non-denominational churches includes the Evangelistic Church of Deliverance, founded in May 1969 by Emeritus Bishop William M. Cheek Sr. By 2001, the church had grown to a mega capacity and moved to its newly constructed sanctuary at 195 Sycamore Street. Let us now proceed with the other of Weldon's non-denominational churches, beginning with the Miracle Church, the True Way Church of God, St. Mark House of Prayer, the Holy Sanctuary Church, the Lifeline Church of God in Christ. We have the Temple Emmanuel, Gospel Truth of the Apostolic Faith, the United Full Gospel Revival Center at 29 Ponderosa Road, God's Church of Deliverance, the Faith and Hope Charity Church. We also have the Valley Community Church. We have the Compassion Worship Center, the Power of God Evangelistic Deliverance. Of the many churches credited tonight, I would also like to acknowledge and credit any other churches named and outstanding outreach ministries that were inadvertently not mentioned. Overall, based on what we have witnessed and heard tonight, the churches of Weldon have made and have paid significant contributions to both its building and supporting the Christian community, and as well as the continued progressive growth of Weldon's prosperity.